everyone. I'm Tiffany. A lot of you can probably brag about your iPhones, cool sneakers, or thousands of TikTok subscribers. I don't have any of that, but what I do have is a polar bear. Are you surprised? Honestly, it's not surprising at all because I live in the tundra. Here, polar bears aren't a luxury. They are a means of transportation. My ancestors have been living in the tundra since ancient times, and I am no exception. My parents and I live in a chum. This is our cone-shaped dwelling. If you've never seen a building like this, I suggest you go on a trip and maybe even spend the night in one. Life in the tundra is difficult and exhausting, but at the same time, it's also pretty interesting. The life of every adult and child is scheduled down to the minute of every day. We can't avoid our responsibilities because our lives depend on them. If you get sick or you're too lazy, then you can die from extreme conditions, so it's better not to risk it. We often have to move from place to place because of our deer. They eat up all the vegetation wherever we stop pretty quickly, and then we have to move on. Our family has a fairly large and profitable reindeer farm, so we have an elite apartment in one of the cities where my older sister Berta lives with our grandmother. Before, Berta lived with us in the tundra, but then she entered university and decided to become a city dweller because of animal husbandry, and the steppes didn't appeal to her. There's enough room in her apartment for all of us, but I would never give up my cold freedom for urban comfort. Especially since then I would have to part with my best friend Bob. By the way, it's about time I introduced you. This is Bob. Yes, that's right. He's a real polar bear, but he's not the least bit mean or scary, at least not with me. We actually grew up together. On my 3rd birthday, my dad gave me a snow-white puppy named Bob, and we became friends very quickly. However, later it turned out that it wasn't a puppy at all, but a polar bear cub. My parents decided that they had to let him go, but I couldn't let them take my only friend, and after a lot of convincing, I was allowed to keep him. He grew a lot faster than I did. After a year, he looked like a real adult bear. My parents quickly got used to our friendship and let me go out on my own with Bob. Nobody with a polar bear next to them needed to be afraid of any other animals. Soon, it was time to go to school. It's not easy to get an education in the tundra, so I was sent to boarding school. I was against the idea, but my parents insisted that I had to get an education, and once I said goodbye to Bob, I set off on a helicopter ride. It was scary to fly for the first time, but it was even scarier after landing when I realized I wouldn't come back for 9 whole months. Being at boarding school was unbearable because of the teachers, bad attitudes, and the mean students. Soon I was expelled and managed to go back to the chum. It turned out that during this time, Bob had lost a lot of weight. He refused to eat and lay in the same spot all day. But when he saw me, he livened up again and we went fishing together. Or rather, Bob went fishing, and he also ate all the fish. I just watched, but the activity still made me pretty happy. Still, the question of my education remained open, and my parents decided to organize a school for nomads. They teamed up with a couple of other nomadic families and invited several teachers. At first, Bob was scared of my new classmates and teachers. One of the teachers refused to coexist with a dangerous predator, but the others gave him a chance and weren't disappointed. Bob loved people and had a lot of fun with his new friends. When all the children sat down to study, he followed only because there wasn't enough room in the tent for the adult bear, so he had to wait at the entrance. When we came back from class, we didn't see Bob. He was nowhere to be found, and we began to worry. We wanted to go looking for him, but my parents stopped us because it was too dangerous. A few days later, he returned with a frightened man. He told us that his name was James and that he went on a journey. He wanted to come talk to us, but suddenly he ran into a bear. He started to run away, and since my Bob loved playing tag, he chased after him. He could easily overtake a person, but he always held back just like he did this time. James was exhausted and ready to die, but Bob just sniffed and licked him. Then James tried to leave, but Bob followed him everywhere and seemed to be asking for something. After a couple of days of wandering, James realized that Bob simply didn't know the way back and took him back to us. He also said that he had lost all his belongings and asked permission to stay with us for some time. We gladly took him in, and somehow it turned out that he stayed for a long time. James didn't understand the rules of survival in the tundra at all, but he willingly learned everything. He took literally any job, and therefore everyone fell in love with him and quickly became attached to him. James knew many interesting stories and was happy to tell them to us. This diluted gray, monotonous everyday life, and my dad started calling James the brother. I never thought before that a stranger could become so close to us. However, a few months later, we were in for a tremendous shock. A police helicopter flew to us, and we learned that James was actually named Charles and that he escaped from prison where he was serving a sentence for bank robbery. They took him away, and we experienced a real shock. We trusted him so much and never even thought that he could be a criminal. On that day, I realized that we need to be careful around strangers because we're in the tundra and are cut off from the whole world. There was no one here to help us. After James' arrest, it took some time to recover from the shock and return to normal life. Still, I started reading a lot of psychology books to start understanding people better. There are big problems with communication in the tundra, so it's difficult for us to distinguish a good person from a bad one. I started reading about people's behavioral characteristics, body language. In my opinion, having studied a ton of thematic literature, I could even work as a psychologist. This is the tundra, and every inhabitant is universal in his abilities. We have to start mastering different professions from childhood. One day, Bob and I went for a walk as usual, started playing around and frolicking. Then at some point, another bear showed up. It was clear from his appearance that he was very aggressive, not towards Bob, but towards me. And then I was seized by real horror and an enraged beast, an affectionate, tame Bob, and me in the tundra. What could be worse? I was bracing myself for the worst and wasn't at all hoping for salvation. But suddenly, something incredible happened. Bob got up on his hind legs and growled. It was the first time I saw him like that, and I confess I was even more frightened. I am ashamed to say it, but I doubted him for a moment. I thought he might be taking the other bear's side, but I very quickly changed my mind because Bob pounced on his relative, protecting me. They got into a fight, and unfortunately, there was absolutely nothing I could do to help my best friend. It was a battle between two animals. I could only watch and pray that Bob would be okay. After 10 or 15 minutes, the fight was over. The second bear, limping, began to run away, and the wounded Bob lay on the ground in a pool of his own blood. I immediately rushed to him and realized that he needed urgent help. So I told him that everything would be fine and ran to the chum to call my parents for help. With great difficulty, the adults managed to carry Bob over so that Dad could examine him. His verdict was disappointing. He said that the bear needed an operation right away, and since we had no doctors or veterinarians, Dad had to be the doctor. It may seem strange to you that a reindeer herder can operate, but this is the tundra. Here, everyone has to master several professions, including complex ones like medicine. In that moment, I realized it was my turn to study medicine. Dad said I needed to change into clean clothes, wash my hands, and come help him operate on Bob. I knew that sooner or later something like this would have happened anyway, so I could not refuse. Besides, it was about saving my best friend's life. Everything turned out to be much more complicated than I ever imagined. Bob kept going in and out of consciousness. He lost a lot of blood, and time passed incredibly slowly. I had never experienced such fatigue before, but I had to stay as focused as possible because the slightest moment of weakness could be fatal for Bob. The operation lasted 6 hours, and when it was all over, my dad and I just fell exhausted right on the floor to rest. Dad said that all the worst was behind us and that we saved our bear. I was happy, but there were still several months of caring for the animal ahead of us because he would need time to recover. Every day, I took care of him, making special food for him to help strengthen his weakened body. Bob looked at me with gratitude and sometimes cried, apparently from the joy that he still had me, and I never got tired of thanking him for his courage in saving my life. A lot of time has passed since that day, and from time to time, I have to operate on animals and even people with my dad. I began to understand anatomy and zoology, and now my parents say that I have a gift, the gift of healing, and so they insist that I go to the city for a while to get an education there and become a doctor. I'm not sure if that's what I want because I like living in the tundra, and I'm not ready to be away from Bob, who saved my life at the cost of his own health. I don't know what to do. Would you, in my place, go to the city and study? I'll read your answers in the comments, and if you like my story, then be sure to press the like button and check if you're subscribed to our channel. Hello everyone, I'm Martha, and I'm a walking machine for dispensing real diamonds. And this is not a joke. Now I will tell you my story from the very beginning. I have one big and main weakness. This is the love of sweets. Somebody cannot live without meat, vegetables, or fruits, but I am ready to sell my soul for a milk chocolate bar, preferably with nuts, or for a piece of cake. I can't stand a day without something sweet. But if the chocolate bars suddenly fly past me, I become angry, irritated, and depressed. Sweets are my everything. Moreover, I cannot fall asleep until I have absorbed all the sweets in the house. I went to bed one night knowing that there was a chocolate figurine in the kitchen, a replica of my English teacher, which my mother had ordered from the famous chocolate here as a present for Miss Marple's birthday. As a result, I spent half the night rolling from one side to the other. I could not close my eyes because all my thoughts were about the chocolate figurine. As bad luck would have it, there was no more sweets at home, and at about 3 a.m. I can no longer control my desires, and I ate Mrs. Marple's head. How delicious it was! At night, everything generally becomes tastier and more attractive, especially chocolate. Having satisfied my craving for Mrs. Maple's chocolate, I fell asleep immediately, and the thought flashed through my mind that I had done something very bad. However, at that time, it was not important. Problems needed to be solved as they arrived. And at that time, it was long past my bedtime. Now, imagine Mrs. Maple's face when she received my present. She did not even realize that it was supposed to be her because there was no head. But I said that the head of the figurine fell off on the way, and I apologized. I sort of got away with it. Oh, poor Miss Marple. But this is not the only time when my craving for sweets was stronger than myself. My whole life is one continuous battle between healthy Martha and Sweet Tooth Martha, and as a rule, I can't control myself. My parents and I often visit my grandmother, and for as long as I can remember, she always had a box of sweets in the refrigerator, which my grandmother never allowed anyone to approach. I don't like greedy people, especially if the greedy person is your own grandmother. How can you hide some candies from your own granddaughter? Because of this, I don't really like to visit my grandmother, and if possible, I avoid going to see her. But one day, it so happened that my parents left me at my grandmother's for the weekend as they went away for a couple of days to rest. And the worst part was that they forgot to buy me some goodies. For me, it was almost the end of the world, and I couldn't find a place for myself. Then a cunning gastronomic plan immediately matured in my head to wait until my grandmother fell asleep and finally make my way to the cherished box. And so, in the pitch darkness, almost by touch, I crept to the refrigerator, opened the door, and took the cherished box, which I quickly went to my room. Candies, candies! How long I have been waiting for this moment! But soon, I was a little disappointed. The candies were not as tasty as I expected. They were some terrible, unpleasant chocolate, and the nuts in general seemed to have hardened and became like stones. Well, it was worth it to keep this much. With all the due respect to sweets, it's not a pity to throw away such candies, honestly. But it seems that my brain didn't work quite right because of the disorder, and I fell asleep with an empty candy box on my bed. Although my plan was to hide the evidence and return the box to its place in the refrigerator so that my grandmother would not notice anything. She never looks in the box anyway. In the morning, I woke up from a terrible scream. It was my grandmother shouting right above me, "Candies, candies, you ate all my candies." At first, I was very scared, and then I got angry. Candies, how many years have you been lying there, and you didn't even eat them? They tasted disgusting anyway. I'll buy you a new normal candies, and you don't have to shout like that, I said. But my grandmother would not let up. She was shouting my diamonds and clutching at her heart. That's why I am very much afraid of old age. A minute ago, she was worried about candies, and now she's suffering about diamonds, which she never had. Oh, how sad is it to not remember what happened a moment ago. Then my grandmother forbade me to go to the toilet and called my parents. She said that I ate her diamonds, which were hidden in the candies. Now we need to think about how to get them back. I was sure that this was some kind of nonsense. But soon I got a call from my excited mother who confirmed my grandmother's words. It turns out that she always knew that diamonds were hidden inside the candies, but she also did not tell me about it. My mother asked me to calm down and, like my grandmother told me, not go to the bathroom in any case so as not to flush millions of dollars down the toilet. Who was very scared and angry at everyone. Why didn't they tell me? I would not have suffered then, and now not at these disgusting candies of unknown origin. I could have broken my teeth on the diamonds, which I thought were just hard nuts. But there was no turning back, and I just had to wait and fearfully hope that I would be able to do without the toilet in the short term. My grandmother began to cry and told me the story about the origin of the diamonds. It turns out that these were our family jewels inherited through the female line. That is, my grandmother got them from my great-grandmother. Then they should have gone to my mother and then to me. But as you can see, I couldn't stand it and ate them ahead of time. I even felt a little ashamed at that moment in front of my grandmother and mother. Well, of course, my grandmother is also a clever cookie. How could one have thought of hiding diamonds in candies? It's like a loaded gun that will fire sooner or later. Anyway, after all, if I had not eaten the candies, someone else would have eaten them, and then we could lose our diamonds forever and irrevocably. In the evening, my parents arrived urgently, and we went to the hospital to do an x-ray and see where the diamonds were. Then the doctors told us that they didn't let me go to the bathroom for so long in vain because the diamonds were still in my stomach and wouldn't go anywhere from there. He then told us to go home, saying that sooner or later, I would start spitting them up. Fortunately, it started the next morning. I woke up with a very sore throat and started coughing. At the same time as I coughed, diamonds began to fly out of my mouth, and my parents and grandmother caught them and collected them in a handkerchief. In fact, they were waiting for it all night, sitting over my bed. But to everyone's disappointment, I only coughed up a quarter of the diamonds. This meant that the fun was not over, and I would continue to remain under the supervision of my family. For the next 5 days, I was taken to the hospital every day where the doctors checked the location of the diamonds, and I in turn gradually coughed them out of my body. You know, this is a very strange feeling to feel like a walking treasure chest, the value of which goes through the roof. After 5 days, almost all the diamonds were collected by my grandmother in some kind of box. All except one, which was not going to leave my body no matter what. And then I was taken back to the hospital where the doctor said that there was no diamond inside me. You should have seen the way my grandmother looked at me at that moment, as if I stole her jewelry. That day I had a bunch of nasty examinations, and in the end we found out that the last missing diamond had grown into my stomach. That is, it had become a part of me and my body, of course. It was impossible to get, but it would be necessary to carry out an operation for this, and therefore our family decided to leave everything as it was. Since then, my parents jokingly say that I am a family treasure and that I realize the love of sweets can ruin me. Who do you think is wrong in this situation? Me, because I ate sweets without permission? Or my family, who hid the fact of the presence of diamonds from me? Write your answers in the comments, click on the thumbs up button, and subscribe to our channel.